Cory Treffiletti, thank you so much for joining. You are CMO of Rembrand, correct?
That is correct. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Oh my goodness, lovely having you here. So, what I want to do is kind of unpack a lot of things that are going on in the industry, especially around marketing and video and a lot of other things in terms of how AI could generate memorable, natural, effective product placement in digital video. So, the goal today is really to try to see your insights about how AI will impact marketing technology and high scale SaaS software. Does that sound all right?
Absolutely. It's one of my
Okay.
favorite topics.
Well, here we go then. So before we even get into all that stuff, because there really is so much that's happened over the last several years that will impact how people are able to do these types of things, and businesses are helping organizations go down that path. I'd love to hear how you and your path led you to CMO at Rembrandt.
Well, I've been with the company officially since about September of last year. I'd been advising them prior to that for about a year or so. And the backstory really is that the CEO, our COO, a few other members of the team, and myself, we've actually worked at a number of companies together in the past. And we've been successful with those companies. I was the CMO for a company called Blue Kai that our CEO had started. Our current COO was actually one of the heads of product at that business, and we sold that to Oracle. We did another company, which was an AI company. We built one of the first AI note-taking assistants. It was a
Wow.
company called Voicea. We sold that to Cisco. And so when you find people that you like to work with, and you're in an industry that is actually full of really great people, you tend to stay there. And I did a little bit of a venture off into fintech for a while, but my whole background has been in advertising and marketing and technology. So it was really a no-brainer to come back and work with these folks again on an idea like this.
Oh, that's great. My goodness, the note-taking thing sort of jumped out to me because it's like it sounds like a great idea. You all sold it because now there's all these organizations that are building these note-taking devices and applications out there right now, right?
Oh, they're all over the place. And I was completely addicted to having that as my personal assistant on these types of calls. And there's so many options now, so many to choose from. So I really do think we exited at the right time.
No, that was ideal. My goodness gracious. So, can you give us an idea of what Rembrandt does?
Sure. So Rembrandt's whole thesis is basically that people understand that free content, has to be supported by advertising. But nobody likes that content to be interrupted by the advertising. And so what we started to do was try and think about a way to embed branded objects and embed products into the video and doing it in a post-production format so that you could actually do that and scale it for all types of video. Because product placement itself has been around for years and years and years, but it's costly. It takes a massive lead time. And to be honest with you, it's only semi-effective because a lot of the time it's too subtle and people don't notice it. And so with Rembrandt, we decided we'd build an AI that could enable you to insert branded objects, so really essentially a form of product placement, into a video in post-production. And then through different types of testing and different types of learning, we've identified how to make sure that those branded objects or those products are noticed. They do capture attention and they don't interrupt the content. And what we've seen is spectacularly good results in terms of not only traditional branding metrics, but also positive engagement from the customers and the viewers themselves. So we've been pretty excited about it.
It's fantastic to hear about that because it sounds like it makes it a lot easier on the front end of it, but on the back end, of course, people have to implement these types of things, which I'm sure is becoming much easier with generative
Yes.
AI. How does generative AI fit into this model now?
So what we do, this AI that we've built is the three stages that it does. Two of them are generative. One of them is more standardized from a data analytics perspective. So the first thing it does is it will identify where in a video is an opportunistic placement for a branded object. So it will look at the space and the background and the depth and everything else and try and figure out where it can go. The second thing is it'll take a two-dimensional image. So that could be something on a table, like a can. It could be an ad that we could turn into a three-dimensional poster. And it will take that two-dimensional image and will render it as a three-dimensional object. And then the third thing it does is it will take the video that's submitted, it will deconstruct the video, insert that three-dimensional object in such a way that we call it physics constrained, meaning it has to be the right size, it's got to be in the right place, it has to have the right lighting, all the different inputs, the sensory inputs, has to make it look natural and real and seamless as if it was there when it was filmed. And then we insert an animation. That could be an exit animation, an intro animation, something around a hot moment, which is a special moment in the video. There's a lot of things that we could do. And that gives you that product placement insertion through the AI. And that all gets done in really a couple of hours in post-production.
I mean, it's unbelievable. How much has this changed over the last, let's say, 2 to 3 to 4 years? Is it significant, or has this been around for a decent amount of time?
Now it's significant. There has been so the evolution of that product placement category. It used to be you'd have to send a product, it could be in a movie or a TV show, and they'd have to film the content with it in there. In the last probably 10 years, you had virtual product placement. So virtual product placement was using visual effects artists to go in, and they would do the same thing in post-production, where they would insert that object, but that can take weeks, if not months, because you have a lot of different camera angles and a lot of different things to factor into to make it look natural. So that still took way too long. With the advent of generative AI in the last year and a half to 2 years, we started to see that you could do this in a much, much faster, much more scalable manner. And so really the AI to do this has only been developed, I think, by us so far. We haven't seen anybody else that's capable of doing it in the short time frame that we're able to do it in, which has made it so it's possible for us to do these insertions in YouTube videos and TikTok videos and LinkedIn videos, which opens up the entire market because that market could never have been done with visual effects. It takes too long.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about. So this is maybe a tangent to the core conversation, but I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts on it. And
Yeah.
that is, when you start to think about product placement in general, how do organizations strike a balance, whether it's a band or a large company, strike that balance of being like, oh, this is thematic, like, oh, the person's actually drinking Coke Zero, whatever the case is, versus like it's just sort of sitting lurking in the background. It's noticeable enough that it's
Yeah.
kind of fits perfectly within that storyline.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the most artistic thing that we have to try and figure out because really you have to find the right balance of being able to make sure that the viewer or the audience notices the product, but it can't be so overt and obnoxious really to be intrusive and to annoy the viewer or the audience. And so what we found is that just having a product on a table, if I had it on the shelves behind me, it's too subtle, right? You're not going to really notice it. You're not going to see it, and it's not going to stay in your mind. What we've been able to do is, since we're also in this YouTube and TikTok environment, the subtle animations that we do, where maybe a can will actually jump up on the table and wiggle and land, it calls your attention to it. And really what we're doing is we're tapping into this concept that good advertising also has to entertain. Okay. Really good advertising has to entertain you in some way because it's borrowing your attention to get you to pay, closer look at it. And so if it's too subtle, you're not going to really have the impact there. If it's too overt, too intrusive, you're going to annoy the viewer and they're going to be upset, even if it was for free content. So what we've been able to do so far is strike this balance. And I think for most marketers, you've got to strike that balance where you there's a mutual reciprocity there. There's a benefit for both where the viewer understands, this is supported by advertising, this is supported by dollars from brands, and I have to accept that. But you also have to understand that their attention is valuable and it's something that you have to not step too far into. You have to strike that right balance.
It's wild to think about. So it sounds like Rembrandt allows organizations a ton of flexibility after production to implement all sorts of advertising, of course, in the background, the subtlety around it, um, which allows for all sorts of new creative thoughts, just as I'm thinking about it, as you go through this. Um, well, do you think you'll start seeing organizations adding um, almost Easter eggs into video, into clips, into advertising, such that people are like looking for something in particular while they're listening to the story? Maybe it's a QR code somewhere in the background that's like, I don't know, done in a very creative way so that it sort of is enmeshed into that artistry. I mean, do you see that as a possibility leveraging a SaaS-based application like this?
Yes, definitely. And we are actually counting on that because over time, we're going to be making this a self-service platform for anybody to go out there and to do it on their own. Right now, we manage most of the insertions with the brands and the creators that we work with, but we do want to make that publicly available over the next probably 3 to 6 months. But that's exactly one of the things that we think is going to be done by brands is that they can insert in a more fun, more creative, almost like a scavenger hunt type of a manner where it is subtle, but people start to get used to looking for it. What we've seen so far is that people really have a positive engagement when they see a brand in there doing something. And when they're doing it with the creators and the content that they love, there's a positive brand association. And we see that with the comments underneath these videos in YouTube. It's been honestly very surprising, and the brands love it. So I can see them almost, and I hate to say it this way, but you're like weaponizing it. You're turning it into a positive thing that you can almost count on. So that's something that I think can absolutely be done.
I mean, that part sounds really, really cool. I love that idea. And also that you guys will eventually be sort of surfacing this to other organizations or individuals
Yeah.
potentially to leverage that as well. It's
Yeah.
a great idea. How has analytics changed in your vision over the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years, either leveraging AI or not, just within the marketing and advertising field and
Yeah.
area?
Well, I mean, I'm a marketer first before anything else, and I love a lot of good data. And what I found is that the industry has almost, and this was partially something that we created, but we've almost over-indexed on the data in terms of the placement in the media and the opportunity to be seen. And there's so much data about the audience and how you deliver to them. And I think people started to get a little overwhelmed by that. So the first part of that answer is that the tools from an AI perspective that allow you to automate the access and even the analytics against that data is really, really valuable because there's so many tools out there now. You can easily set up an API to have all your data going into one place. And then you can have that data being spit out in some sort of an analytics report that gives you recommendations. So that's pretty straightforward now, especially because when you look at that data, there's a lot of binary decision making being done. Do I take this down? Do I increase the spend, et cetera? Even if you look at A/B testing, that's binary. You can make a decision that can be recommended through an AI. But what it does is it now allows the industry to also start to index the other direction, to start to think more about the creative again. We started out this whole industry way, way back in 94, 95, 96 with really creative executions to put brands in digital media. And then we've kind of diluted that over the last 10 years, 15 years or so, because we over-indexed on the data. Now I feel like this opens up a lot of opportunity for us to be able to start thinking about creativity again, because you can automate the basic binary components of data and placement and targeting. But now you start to think about the types of messaging and the way that message is delivered and how and where that message is delivered in a way that we didn't have the attention to focus on. So now I feel like it's really, really, it's a great opportunity to be back in advertising and marketing again because you can be more creative again.
No, it's wild to think about that. When you start to think about other trends, possibly, do you see any that are taking off in the advertising area right now?
Um, Well, there's definitely a lot of things around AR and VR. There's definitely going to be a lot of things with this spatial computing component, what Apple's starting to pioneer and put forward. There's a lot of really interesting opportunities. I just recently went to go see U2 at the Sphere, and I know that they're going to be putting that eventually into a VR environment so you can put on the goggles from whomever and watch it there. There's a lot of really interesting places where brands are going to be popping up because it's not just about print and TV and outdoor and the basic formats, even including the basic digital formats like websites, etc. Um, I also have this really big feeling that search itself is going to go through a massive disruption because if you think about the web and the way it's set up right now, search drives most traffic around the web. But with generative search and the results that come from it, I no longer need to go click around to find the information. It's basically scraped and given back to me. So that means that the advertising industry impressions are going to go down because people aren't going to be on secondary websites. Search is going to be less useful. So there's so much about to happen in the next 5 years in advertising that I don't really think people are thinking it through properly.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. There's just so much happening. It's almost difficult to wrap the head around.
It is.
I'm trying to think if there's anything in particular in that space that I was going to jump off into, and one was Web3. I know that we've seen this crazy world of NFTs, but it went up and then it came back down, and now we're sort of in a weird plateau moment in time. But there's some that are talking about how NFTs, which really just mean ownership of something or provable asset, or it's a way for people to collect things. So I know that like Starbucks is using essentially virtual stickers to say, okay, I've got this, or I've done that, or I've been to this particular store, maybe in Seattle versus in Washington, D.C. or New York. And
Mhm.
people then develop this idea of collecting things. And so I was just kind of curious to get your impressions, if you have any, on sort of how Web3 could eventually have an impact on sort of advertising in the industry of product placement as well.
Yeah. It's weird, to be honest with you. I've thought about it. And blockchain and NFTs, it's an area that advertising and marketing has wanted to be involved in. They've been trying to force the marriage for the last 5 or 6 years. but it's an awkward marriage because what I've, and this is my personal opinion, is that the space of NFTs and collectibles and trading is a very niche category. I mean, the only business that's really figured that out is eBay. Right? eBay allows you to be engaging with collectors in a marketplace, in addition to so many other things that they sell. And I just don't know what the mainstream application is going to be for collectibles. You know, collectibles to me are synonymous with a fad, right? You can look at comic books, you can look at Furbies, you can look at any of those things that people have been collecting for years. And eventually they hit a plateau and they come back down. Now, blockchain does have a business value to it because of that ability to designate ownership and to track it digitally. But the collectibles market, I still think it's always going to be a collectibles market. It's going to boom and bust constantly. So I'm not really sure if there's a place in advertising and marketing for it in the long term.
What about loyalty points?
Mhm.
Is that something that you found sticky in the industry for a while or no?
I do think loyalty points are. I think loyalty points can be done in a closed environment. Like Starbucks, for example, they are sending me different ways to get stars all the time, and about half the time, I do take them up on it, and it does drive more consideration. Right? I will go to a Starbucks versus something else because of the loyalty points. I know I'm going to get a free drink. Loyalty points when it comes to travel are obviously very, very strong. But in lower considered items, impulse-oriented items, loyalty has a harder time being fixed, I feel like. It's something that, if I buy something on an impulse, how often am I going to buy that product? Now, coffee is a little bit different because people get part of the routine in their habits, but loyalty on other things, I'm not exactly sure. And I'm not sure if NFTs are a great way to track that loyalty.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. And when you mentioned the blockchain components, I was like thinking about loyalty points could be leveraged for a tokenization of some sort of program. But do you really need to go down the path of setting up a blockchain or leveraging a blockchain for
Yeah,
something like that? Probably not until it
no.
becomes more ubiquitous and less expensive, and the transactions and all that stuff are easier to go through. But yeah, just something I was just kind of curious, get your
No, and
perspective on
it's a
that.
fascinating topic too, because if you think about it, there's almost like there's a price point where blockchain and NFTs have significant value, and below that price point, they don't. So if you think about things like real estate, owning a car, even CDs and stocks and stuff like that, you could have them be homed on the blockchain, and there's a significant value there. But things like Beanie Babies and books and stuff like that, not so much.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll mention about this is like when we start seeing more people use sort of the VR, the MR mixed reality, which is really what those things are, Apple's latest device. The idea of people, and this is where it gets really weird. You start spending more and more time in this. Right now, people are like, all right, I did 2 hours and that was a lot. But when it's not as heavy and it's less of a implant or whatever, moment in time where it's sitting there, this huge device on your face all day
Mhm.
long, I think people will wear it 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And with that, they'll have maybe virtual homes and virtual assets, and all that stuff will then be incorporated into video because they're going to do advertising for it. So then how do you draw that back? And I'm just like, okay, so it's going to be potentially the people owning more digital things. And how do you
Mhm.
prove that digital asset leveraging this? And then you build on the top of that the layer of advertising and promoting these types of things. How would that be? So I don't know. That's a little bit further out, but interesting to start thinking about, I guess.
Yeah, it is fascinating too because I have my boys. I have a 14 and a 12-year-old, and they will use their Oculus relatively often. I'll jump in it to check it out, but after a while, half an hour or so, it's really disorienting.
Yes.
And I think the Vision Pro, if I understand properly, you can see through it, so you're kind of not completely cut off from the world. So it's more of of an AR type of engagement.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see if we start to have that AR, VR, MR type of environment on all the time, what is the effect on our eyes? What is the
Oh,
effect
yeah.
on our brain and such? So it's going to be a while. I think there needs to be a little bit of studying done before we start to dive into it for permanent use.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's almost like, people spending so much time on their devices, right? So they're like,
Yeah,
it's like, how is this going to
that's why I have
transform
glasses now.
us? Yeah, yeah. Well, goodness gracious, is there anything else that you'd like to mention about the organization or about what you're working on right now in closing?
No, I mean, we're really excited about this opportunity to offer this new channel, this new medium, really, or new format for advertisers. And once again, the fact that you can have a channel for media that the creators and the publishers like, that the advertisers and the brands and the agencies like, but also the viewers and the audience apparently seem to like. That's something that we got really, really excited about. So we're going to continue to find new ways to augment and to deliver something that all three sides of that can appreciate.
Oh, it's a very exciting time. My goodness gracious. So, Corey, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it too. Thanks for having me on.